This is my final exam assignment for Psych 413. I'm basing my research question on outgroup acceptance in teenagers and young adults. So let's first start by defining outgroups and what outgroup acceptance is. So in general, outgroups are any group to which one does not belong with or which one does not identify. So outgroup acceptance would be the acceptance of somebody who is in a group which one does not identify with. The inspiration for this question was drawn on our week 6 readings. So our first one being titled Like Me, A Foundation for Social Cognition by Andrew N. Meltzoff. So he argued against Piaget's notion of infants being egocentric and asocial creatures and highlighted the notion that infants learn through imitating others and by seeing others enact emotions, and proposed that infant from social encounters is therefore more interpretable than classically supposed. This research provides evidence that infants regulate their actions based on watching emotional exchange between other people, something he coined as emotional eavesdropping. And this research really highlights the imitation and social learning aspect of infants' emotions. Our second reading is by Dunham et al., and this study researched the consequences of minimal group affiliations in children. So this study had 5-year-olds randomly assigned to a group by t-shirt color across 3 experiments. They used implicit association tests and saw that 5-year-olds respond faster to children in their own shirt color paired with the word good, and slower when it was paired with bad, showing a clear automatic bias favoring the in-group, even without explicit group labels. Our third one was from Buttleman and Baum. So researchers here were trying to figure out whether in-group liking develops for out-group disliking. Using measures of implicit bias, once again, they used 6 and 8-year-old children, and they proposed a novel allocation game where kids could give positive resources like a balloon or a cookie, or negative resources like a spider or moldy toast to an in-group puppet or an out-group puppet, or a neutral box. So this design let researchers separate in-group love from out-group hate, and in their findings, they saw for positive resources, both ages showed strong in-group favoritism, more positive to the in-group than the out-group, and for negative resources, only 8-year-olds reliably allocated more negatives to the out-group than to the in-group. So this was an evidence of out-group hate, and 6-year-olds mainly withheld negatives from their in-group. So there was no pure out-group hate there. So in conclusion, in-group love is present by preschool and can drive biased behavior across childhood, and out-group hate seems to develop around the age of 6. So after reading these articles, I researched 3 new articles to incorporate into this project. The first one being a study done by Tenenbaum, and the main purpose of this study was to examine British children's ability to identify and reason about the causes of leadership's differential treatment based on a story character's background. So the researchers hypothesized that children are more likely to rate behavior as discriminatory if it is directed to a working class target rather than an upper class target, and this outcome increased with age. So the population include 122 children aged 6 to 11 years of old of various ethnicities. The population then was read pictureless stories about peers, and they used the words upper and lower class to describe the individuals, because those were the words that children could understand rather than working class. Children completed then a researcher-created brief implicit association test to assess class discrimination. And the findings from this study concluded that older children were more likely to view discrimination as unfair and attributed to bias from the teachers, while younger children were more likely to consider other factors. And they also found that children's own social class and attitudes did not influence their judgment. So this is a really valid finding to take into consideration for my own research, as it outlines the importance of the development in older children's reasoning skills about discrimination, which could aid in their decision of outgroup acceptance. So secondly, we have a study done by Corbett et al. So this study's goal was to examine the development of in-group bias in children's resource allocation decisions in the domains of care and fairness. So researchers hypothesized that fairness concerns would be applied impartially, especially amongst older children, 7 to 9 years of age, who tend to show a strong concern for equity-based fairness. So they sampled 95 participants between the ages of 4 and 9 years old, and participants were sampled with the goal of balancing age and gender. Each child was assigned either a red or green team by picking a random coin, and they were then assigned sharing tasks and resource allocation tasks in a mix of trials proposed with caring and fairness. So, another findings from the study yielded that for fairness, children's fairness-related allocations did not show a difference between in-group and out-group recipients. In other words, they were equally as likely to treat peers fairly, regardless of group membership. In the CARE trials, however, there was evidence of in-group bias. Children distributed negative resources like a disliked sticker to out-group members more often to in-group members. So these findings help elicit the notion that caring and fairness are distinct moral developments in children, and they relate to acceptance of out-group and in-group members. Lastly, I have a study done by Yang et al., and the main goal of the study was to evaluate to what extent do we morally value equal treatment to in-groups and out-groups. So they explored how both children and adults develop moral ideas around fairness that should extend beyond one's own group, which they called group transcendent fairness. So to investigate it, they ran 4 studies, one looking at American adults. Studies 2 and 3 looked at children ages 4 to 9, and then study 4 looked at Chinese individuals, 200 Chinese adults. So they found when they gave each study a scenario in which they had to allocate resources and were asked what the right thing was to do for the children, and for the adults, they were asked to judge what was morally right, to favor the in-group or give equally. So they found that children around 4 to 6 years of age tended to favor their in-group, showing in-group bias. But by about age 8 or 9, children began to endorse equal treatment across groups in a similar way to adults did. So adults in both the US and Chinese study judged equal allocation as morally right, regardless of group type. However, across all ages, participants also recognize that this moral ideal is not always how humans act in our actual society and reality. So the findings concluded that group transcendence fairness emerges gradually in childhood and appears to be recognized across cultures. So this finding is incorporated the influence of moral fairness that outgroup acceptance is influenced by, making that a confounding variable to be aware of in my research. So my research question is, do high school students ages 13 to 18 or young adults aged 19 to 25 have greater displays of outgroup acceptance? I chose these age cohorts because in the literature, I did not see much on teenagers or young adults. It was mostly on children aged like 6 to 9, 4 to 9, and older adults in like their 30s to their 70s. So my hypothesis would be, I hypothesize based on previous research that adults aged 19 to 25 will exhibit significantly greater displays of outgroup acceptance than teenagers ages 13 to 18. So for my study design, how I might go about this is by obtaining participants and dividing them into 2 age-based cohorts, so 120 teenagers, 120 young adults. By expanding on the previous studies, I would most likely have them complete 2 primary measures of outgroup acceptance, a brief implicit association task, and a resource allocation task using real monetary acceptance. So in the resource allocation task, each participant would, in their divided groups, be divided further into a blue shirt or a red shirt group for both young adults and teenagers. And they would be put into a room. Participants would be asked when they have 2 other members of either their in-group or an out-group standing in front of them to decide which individual will receive a small amount of money. The participant would be provided with the reason as to why the out-group member would need the money, and the in-group member would be provided with no reason. This is kind of just to implement a group transcendent fairness, and these interactions would then be recorded to measure reaction time in the allocation of resources, and the choice would be served as a behavioral indicator of in-group favoritism or out-group acceptance, depending on which color shirt they chose. So my proposed results, research from Corbett et al. Shows that younger children tend to favor their in-group when allocating resources. This suggests a strong in-group favoritism that emerges in early development. However, findings from Yang et al. Reveal an important discovery. Although older children explicitly recognize group transcendent fairness as morally correct, their actual anonymous allocation behaviors remain just as biased as younger children. So together, these results indicate that by middle childhood, children develop a clear sense of group transcendent fairness, but this understanding does not immediately translate to their actions, and fairness norms appear in their decision making, but not always in their choices, their actual choices. So children can articulate that fairness should apply equally across groups, yet their actual choices continue to favor their own group. So because of this notion proposed in the previous research, I would hypothesize that older adults who are more developmentally mature would deter from favoring their own group and show greater displays of out-group acceptance than teenagers. So for implications, as fairness and in-group favoritism arise in young childhood and middle-aged children have the moral understanding that group transcendent fairness is morally correct, my proposed study could highlight the importance of equality teaching starting from around ages 9 to 17 throughout middle school and high school to give this age group the necessary tools for treating each other equally and being able to recognize when they are engaging in their own implicit bias and displaying behaviors that do not correlate with out-group acceptance. So if the proposed hypothesis is supported, and young adults have higher displays of out-group acceptance, the introduction of equality teaching and educating middle schoolers and high schoolers in their own implicit biases on in-group favoritism could aid in more out-group acceptance, and in turn this could potentially decrease rates of bullying in school settings and thus lower levels of teenage mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, and substance abuse disorders.